Thank you.
You ready?
The real big day.
We'll call this meeting to order, special meeting of the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors. And first item on our agenda is the presentation of the fiscal year 21 proposed county budget. So take it away, County Administrator.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone behind us. I hope everyone's doing well this evening. This seems to come around faster and faster every year. Seems like I was just up here a couple of days ago doing this for fiscal year 20, but we are now talking about the fiscal year 2021 budget. Dear honorable members of the Board of Supervisors, I am pleased to present for your review and consideration the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget for Montgomery County. The proposed budget for all funds is $209.3 million and represents an increase of 3.9% or $7.8 million over the current fiscal year. My recommendations in the proposed budget provide for continued investment in both our human and capital resources, continued investment in our public schools operations and capital needs, and continued investment in our public safety operations. With the proposed budget of $209.3 million, $89.2 million is provided from federal, state, and other designated funds. The remaining $120.1 million represents county dollars not designated for a specific purpose, which includes the projected growth that we've referenced earlier of $3.8 million. Proposed funding for the county's general fund, net of transfers to other funds, totals $52.6 million, which is an increase of 2.3%. Proposed funding for the school operating fund, net of transfers to other funds, totals $120.7 million, an increase from the current year of 4%. The total county budget also includes the debt service fund, the school nutrition fund, the transfer to the school capital fund, the transfer to the county capital fund, the transfer to the economic development authority, and the law library fund. And rather than mine numb you with all the numbers, they are in the budget message. For fiscal year 2021, I recommend no increase in the real estate tax rate from the current fiscal year. If approved by the board, fiscal year 2021 would be the 8th consecutive year that the county's real estate tax rate remains at 89 cents. Continued strength of our local economy, along with conservative fiscal management by the board, has enabled us to maintain the same real estate tax rate for nearly a decade. There's a couple of charts that talk about where the money comes from in the budget and where it goes, but carrying on with the budget message. The board approved recommendations for funding of capital and maintenance projects in the current fiscal year budget. And I'm recommending that that funding be continued for the following areas in the fiscal year 2021 year as well. The school capital fund, 2.5 cents of the real estate tax rate that's set aside, which equates to about $2.2 million, that continue to be set aside for future school capital projects. The county capital fund, 1.5 cents of the real estate tax rate, which is approximately $1.3 million, to be continued to set aside for fire and rescue equipment. The county capital fund, which includes 1 cent of the real estate tax rate, as well as about $1.4 million from other general fund revenues, that's $2.2 million that I recommend we continue to set aside for capital and maintenance projects. It's important that the county prioritize critical long-term projects by setting aside recurring funds. With an ongoing funding source of $2.2 million for the school capital fund, dollars will continue to accrue annually for the next priority school capital project. With the money set aside for fire and rescue departments, the ability to replace critical equipment ensures our volunteers are well equipped to provide high-quality service to our citizens. Other monies earmarked for the county capital fund provide dollars annually for the following areas. $425,000 annually for the Auburn Park project, which puts aside funds each year toward the development and future construction of the park in Reiner. $210,000 annually for information technology infrastructure projects, which allows for technology needs across the county to be addressed. $858,000, or 1 cent of that real estate tax rate, will enable us to set aside $100,000 a year for future valley-to-valley trail projects and still provide $758,000 each year for other future county capital projects, and $750,000 for other miscellaneous county capital projects, which allows for proactive preventive maintenance for handling large-scale building repairs or replacements. Included in your budget message is a chart that shows funding for the major areas in the budget for the past 5 fiscal years. Of the $1.75 million in additional county funding requested by the schools for their operations, I propose new funding of $1.55 million for the school operating fund. In addition to the $1.1 million included for the increased cost of school debt service resulting from the fall bond issue to renovate and expand the Christiansburg Strand Elementary Schools, the total of $2.65 million, or 70% of the new fiscal year 2021 county monies, support our public schools. While my recommendation does not fully fund the school's request for operating funds, it's important to note that in the past 5 years, the county has increased local funding for school operations by over $9.7 million. There's a chart included in your message as well that talks about education expenses for debt service and school capital projects. I will also say that this year the state has stepped up a little more than they have in years past, which is certainly helpful, which is why the amount that the schools needed from the county was not quite as much as in years past. We've got to continue to put pressure in Richmond on those folks to keep funding our education. The proposed budget for fiscal year 2021 continues with the $500,000 for the Accessing Community College Education Program with New River Community College. With these funds, graduating seniors from high schools in Montgomery County can continue their education tuition-free at NRCC with their commitment to provide community service in return. This will be the 3rd year that the county has supported students through this program, with $1.25 million in county funds being allocated to this important program today. We're very fortunate to have many dedicated and skilled employees who provide excellent service to our citizens and businesses each day. To ensure that we recognize our employees and compensate them for the services they deliver, I propose an increase in compensation for all full-time and part-time classified employees by 3%, effective July 1, 2020. Employees who have reached the top of their pay grade would receive a 3% one-time bonus in lieu of a salary increase. This funding of approximately $767,000 is in addition to the nearly $407,000 in additional dollars needed to cover the required contributions to the Virginia retirement system for our employees. As occurs with every budget year, requests for county funds far exceed the resources that are available. Requests this year were no different and totaled $5.1 million in new funding, excluding compensation and fringe benefits. However, the process for determining funding recommendations this year was different. The county's leadership team, which is comprised of our department directors and constitutional officers, participated in the process by reviewing, discussing, and ranking of the budget requests that were submitted. The team's recommendations included operational and position requests. As a result, the proposed budget recommends funding for 2 new positions across the county. One, an administrative assistant in the Public Information Office, which will be located at the desk down front as you come in the Government Center, and an additional animal control officer in General Services to help with the demand in that area. The leadership team reviewed and discussed all the positions that were requested. Many of the positions in the request for added operational funds were very worthy of consideration, but funding simply did not exist to fund all the recommendations. Although not ranked by the leadership team during the development of the budget, the county did receive requests for increased funds from agencies outside the local government totaling $403,865 above the current year funding. The proposed budget provides a total of $2.7 million to various outside agencies and organizations, some of which are mandated, as the county is contractually or statutorily required to provide funds to these agencies. The proposed fiscal year 2021 budget continues the board's tradition of fiscally responsible operating plans for Montgomery County. The budget as proposed provides essential funding for continuation of our services to our citizens and businesses, maintains the programs and activities of our various departments, and allows for investment in our capital and human resources needed to perform our jobs safely and efficiently. I'm very appreciative of the county's department directors, agency heads, and constitutional officers for their participation in the budget review process, which resulted in the recommendations being presented to you in the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. I'm very fortunate to work with a team who understands the fiscal challenges that face local governments and who supports our fiscally conservative approach to budgeting. As always, I express special thanks to Carol, Angie, Mark, Paul Kaiser, and Susan Dickerson, who review, revise, and assemble the budget documents prior to my presentation to you this evening. I'm also grateful to Durley Aguilar and Jen Harris, who bring their creative skills to our budget document, which I think you got or will get, presentations and information provided to citizens to ensure we reflect our best efforts. I know that fiscal year 2021 will continue to build on our past successes and continue our tradition of growth and achievement. County staff will be reviewing the proposed budget information with you in more detail in the weeks ahead. An additional work session has been scheduled for Monday night, March 16th, 2 weeks from tonight, at 6 p.m. to allow the board to establish the advertised tax rate and advertised budget in order to meet the required deadlines. A joint meeting with the Montgomery County School Board is slated for Tuesday, March 17th at 7 p.m. to allow for discussion on a number of topics, which I'm sure will include the proposed schools budget and the county budget as well. The required public hearing on the proposed budget and tax rate public hearings are scheduled for Thursday, April 2nd at 6 p.m. Our plan is for the board to approve the fiscal year 2021 budget at your regular board meeting on Monday, April 13th. In closing, Montgomery County is a very diverse and growing community, and I am confident that this proposed budget continues to keep the county focused on the future. I'm deeply appreciative of your continued support and your leadership, and I welcome your comments and suggestions as you review the attached information in the days ahead. That's the budget message. It has some of the details. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carol. Carol has several slides for you to review that have a little more detail on some of the numbers. I will mention before Carol comes up tonight, as we've done in years past, is just for information and presentation. What I would ask is, as you go through the budget message, as you go through the information that Carol will be presenting, if you have any questions, what works best for staff, and I think works best for the board, is if you will email those questions to me or Carol, and we will gather the responses and email them back to all 7 board members. That way, one of you may be thinking of a question, and if we get the information, we'll send it to all 7. That helps expedite some of the process. With that, Carol.
Okay, Craig has been saying in several settings that this budget has been boring. So I'll proceed on with the boring budget and try not to bore you too much more than we already have so far. I keep saying every time he says the budget's boring, it doesn't get any less painful. Even though it may be boring, it still hurts. So you all keep that in mind as we go through. I want to say a little bit about the budget process, just as a review of what process the county does go through. And because you'll see some of these terms within the document as you go through them, we establish base budget targets, and that identifies what's in the base budget. We have personnel, which means the salary projection is run to update the personnel to the latest date we have before we have to close it for the document. During a course of a year, people leave, people begin, they start with different salaries. So we update the personnel complement to the most recent that we have and the benefits to the most recent rates that we have. O&M stands for operation and maintenance, and what we do with that is cap that out at what the current year level is. Here's what your target is for the current year. Capital outlay is removed. Those tend to be or are one-time only costs. So if you bought a copier in the current year, you shouldn't need to buy another one next year, so those funds are taken out and available for reallocation to other needs as presented. That's why you see another term within your budget document, and that's the addenda. The addenda are those requests that are made that are over and above what your base budget targets are. So those requests, if funded, are shown separately. One last thing that happens with the process is what we call challenging the base. And what that means is before anything is added back or recommended for funding, the actual base for those costs are reviewed in terms of how much money you already have, and if it looks like you can cover these costs without adding any more money, then it's not recommended for funding. So for 20, the proposed budget, as always, there's a lot more in requests than there are funds to go around. Including department requests and compensation, the total was about $5.9 million. The school's operating request to you was 1.8. Debt service for schools based on the last issuance. And I don't have requests beside that because it's not a request, it's a requirement. You issue debt, you have to pay the bill. An additional 1.1 million is needed. So in all total, 8.7 million. You had 3.8 million. Now when Mark presented his initial numbers, that was at 3.6. He's been busily working, looking at additional numbers and collections and sales tax reports, and we added some additional funds to that. So right now you're at 3.8 million. If you subtracted that off all of the requests, you would still be short 4.9 million. In order to fully fund that using the real estate tax rate, you would have to go from 89 cents to 95 cents. And this is always a popular number every year. 1 cent on the real estate tax rate is a little over $858,000 now. This is just a review of some things that were in the 20 budget, the set-asides. Craig's mentioned most of them. I'll just quickly run through those again just to make sure we're all on the same page. And these do not take new monies. These were existing monies. They're recurring dollars, so they carry forward into the next year. So you have $1.50 for fire and rescue equipment, 1 cent for county capital projects, of which $100,000 for the Valley to Valley Trail is earmarked, $425,000 for the Auburn Park. That comes from the $390 you all have set aside previously. That was for the Auburn Park and Creed Fields. The $390 plus there was $35,000 that has been unallocated before. We put those two together. Creed Fields project is funded currently, so we've recommended that $425, the $390 and the $35,000 go toward becoming a recurring source for the Auburn Park project. The $210 was mentioned for technology, and the $750 for capital maintenance continues forward. There's 2.5 cents of the real estate tax rate still earmarked to carry forward, $2.2 million for future school capital projects. And what does this all look like with a lot of numbers on a page? Well, this is sort of what it looks like. Over $209 million in this budget. The general fund of all the revenues, about $135 million, but out of those dollars, funds have to be transferred to other funds, the largest of which being the school operating fund. The increase to that is $1.55 million. Debt service is $22.7 million. That's an increase of $1.4 million. Now that's less than the number we just showed on the other page. That's because in the current year, there was money in special contingencies that was unallocated that by resolution you all agreed to put toward debt service. That was almost $300,000, 270 some. So because that was reoccurring dollars, we can then net that off the total cost of 1.4, and that brings us back to the 1.1 million needed to make the full debt service payment. The school capital fund, the $35,000 increase in that's related to the increase in the penny value. When value goes up, the value of the penny increases, then that puts a little bit more money into each one of the funds and earmarks. The EDA, $380,000, that's the Economic Development Authority, and that's the amount of the funding each year that's transferred for the incentive package. County capital, $3.5 million. It's a little less than your amount from the current year, and that's because about $40,000 was transferred from the IT earmark to be placed with the technology equipment in the operating budget. Most of the replacement schedules are in the operating budget earmarked together, and we moved some money there to accelerate that PC replacement schedule. General government, and Craig's already gone over most of these numbers. $52.6 million. School operating's $120.7 million, with an increase in total dollars, not just county dollars, of 4.6. Again, you see school nutrition. The debt service number is a little different from the one at the top, the 22 million versus the 24 million. And that has to do with some bonds that were called QSCAP bonds that were issued for the Blacksburg High School project that has a revenue source. They send you a subsidy payment, and then you have to pay the debt service on it. So it's a revenue coming in but going back out for the payments. So that makes the total slightly higher than the amount of county funds that go into those payments. School capital, again, we've talked about, and so where does that fall in terms of the amount of undesignated monies? The $3.8 million in undesignated, if you add school operating, school debt service together, that's $70 million of that total number. That supports public schools either through facilities or through operations. The remainder for county-funded requests is 30% of that total new dollar number. And we had a debate today if we still call these pies or are they circles anymore, but assuming they're still pies, where does it come from? Where does your money come from? Well, you can see from what's outlined here, the lifeblood of what comes to the county to support services is property taxes. And of those property taxes, real estate is the largest amount. The designated portion, slice, piece of the pie, whatever you want to refer to it as, and we've talked about this before, is the continued shrinking portion. Designated is made up of funds that are earmarked for a specific purpose, but the largest portion of that tends to be state dollars for schools. 10 years ago, that slice was 48%. 15 years ago, it was 54%. So as the needs grow and get bigger, that particular section of the pie has not kept up. So where does it go? If you take all funds for schools and you add debt service, 70% of it supports public schools. The other 30% goes to county functions, county debt service, and county capital. So if you look at the general fund 25% section slice listed here, and you go over to the next graph, 52.6 million is the general government functions. That's what's the 25% in the previous slide. Out of general government functions, there are 9 of them, and as you can see, more than half goes to 2 functions, public safety and social welfare. General government functions, 30% of the total new revenue goes to support these functions. And these functions also include 12 county departments, 5 constitutional offices, 3 agencies under separate boards, 4 court functions, 5 rescue squads, 5 fire departments, and 46 outside agencies. County funding for schools, this is a chart we show every year. This is just for operations. It does not include debt service or school capital. Some of the major highlights, and Craig's mentioned most of these, so I'm not going to spend much time, just to point out the 3% compensation. That's $767,000. We do have a VRS rate increase this year. That's $407,000. There are only 2 new positions. You see what those are. There's about $165,000 increase for the sheriff's office. That the large portion of that has to do with replacing the in-car and body camera system. The registrar, a lot of that, $73,000, is to replace the poll books. $45,000 for pictometry. That's so we can get on the same schedule with the towns, so that the flight occurs at the same period of time and it's updated at the same time. $60,000, a little over $60,000, is the request being made to each one of the towns, the county, and Virginia Tech for the 911 authority. And a little over $69,000 is your penny increases for the set aside. The challenging of the base that I talked about before, setting targets and trying to identify dollars that can be reallocated. In the 21 budget, there's $577,570 of the FY20 budget that was either in savings or reallocations that go to support the request for additional funds and departments. And again, $1.1 million for debt service in schools and $1.55 for the school operating fund. And Craig's already gone over the next date you're looking at is March 16th, back in this room, to establish an advertised tax rate and advertised budget in order to go to the public hearing. That's all I have to present. I'll turn it back over to Craig if he has some more to say about it.
Appreciate that very much, Carol and Angie and Mark. Thank you guys again for all your work. Jen, you and Durley, I appreciate everything everyone's done. I did use the word boring early on about the budget because, to be candid with you, it came together very nicely this year. We usually have quite a bit of consternation. We didn't have, I don't, at least on my side of the building, I don't know about their side of the building, but things came together pretty well this year. There were a number of positions that we weren't able to fund. There are other initiatives that we weren't able to fund. We tried really hard to get as close as we could to the school's request. It's very important to me, and you've heard this theme from me for many years now, to make sure we've got these recurring dollars in place to sustain things going into the future. It's important to take care of the day-to-day, but we've got to continue to put money aside so that as issues come up in the future, we're able to address those. But with that, Mr. Chair and board members, that's all we have this evening. As I mentioned earlier, I know this is a lot of information all at once, so over the next couple of days, as you have questions, please email those to us. We'll begin to research those, send those back out to everybody. Have a board meeting next Monday night, and we can have a work session added on the agenda for the budget if there's questions that come up that you want to talk about at that time as well. But that's all we have.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Meadows, Angie, Mark, Carol, for all your hard work. Jennifer, you too. I know it's a big team effort to get all that done, and I'm just going to go ahead and apologize in advance for all the other things we start making you look for in the next few weeks. So with that, we have no other business. So this meeting is adjourned.